Today we'll be discussing the top 40 comedy albums of all time. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr. Asif Doja, and this is the Doctor of Laughs.
Not a real doctor.
Ali Hassan. Every episode I pick a topic for Ali from comedy and entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic from medicine and health and grills me on that topic. But today is a special episode.
Woo!
Very special. Today we're going to be diving into a list that the AV Club put out last summer, which is their top 40 comedy albums of all time. Now, because this list is 40 albums and we're going to go into a deep dive into most of them, we thought let's just save our medical topic for a future episode.
I'm going to have dry mouth at the end of this, huh? Is that a medical?
It might be. It might be. I'll put that on the list for a future episode.
Okay. Get ready. Dry mouth, but moist ears for all of you as we dive in the great stand-up comedy.
Okay, Ali, let's get started with this list. What I thought I would do, we won't have time to discuss all 40 albums individually, but what I'd do is I thought I'd go by tens. So I'll start with number 40, go to 31, and then you can tell me what you think of them, and then we'll go take them in little chunks so it's not too overwhelming for you.
For me, thanks. I'll be able to figure it out. But yeah, let's do it.
We'll put links to the list so you can see it. So let's go from 40 to 31. Number 40 is The First Family, Von Meter. Number 39, The Wonderful World of Jonathan Winters. Number 38, This Is a Recording by Lily Tomlin. Number 37, Stan Freberg Presents the United States of America, Volume 1. Number 36, Peter Sellers, Best of Sellers. Number 35, Bob and Doug McKenzie, The Great White North, some Canadian content there. Number 34, The Carnegie Hall Concert, Lenny Bruce. Number 33, Joan Rivers, What Becomes a Semi-Legend Most. Number 32, My Son the Nut, Alan Sherman. And number 31, Adam Sandler's They're All Gonna Laugh at You. So that's our first 10, Ali, in this list. What are your thoughts on some of these ones?
Number 40 was a guy named Von Meter. Never heard of Von Meter. So let me just say that. The First Family. Yeah, I don't know.
Something to check out there.
Something to check out there. Jonathan Winters, I knew him later in life. Like this album, The Wonderful World, it was 1960. And I think I was introduced when I was very young watching Carson. He was like one of Carson's favorite guests. I didn't understand why Carson was, I mean, you could see that Johnny Carson was so excited to have him there. And I never fully understood it, but I think if you want to explore, it's apparently a lot of character work and voices and stuff like this. You know, he was, a lot of that's it. It was absurdity.
Yeah, he was a big influence, huge influence on Robin Williams, and Robin Williams may come up later. Of course, that's why Jonathan Winters was on Mork and Mindy. He played Mork and Mindy's son, but he kind of aged in reverse, a bit of a Benjamin Button sort of thing. And again, this kind of like just so quick-witted. That was my impression of why people like Carson and Williams loved Jonathan Winters so much.
Sure. If you get into any long-form interview of Robin Williams where he talks a little bit about his career, you'll definitely hear him bring up Jonathan Winters. Number 38, you said Lily Tomlin. So that, I mean, 1972, she released this album. She had this character she used to do on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In called Ernestine, the telephone operator.
Yeah, I remember this character, yeah. You
remember this character? So this album is basically based around that character. The cover of the, even though this is a recording, that's a nod to a telephone operator saying this is a recording, and it's her character there. So it's very sort of tied to 1972 and all this, but I think it deserves to be on this list. She got a Grammy in 1972. A woman got a Grammy for Best Comedy Recording, and it was Lily Tomlin. So I think this is exactly where it should be on the list of best albums. I never heard of Stan Freberg.
Okay.
I will have to look that up. I wonder, he must be because it says The United States of America, Volume 1, The Early Years. He must have been a political comic who then influenced many other political comics after the fact. Peter Sellers, hello? This is a 1958 album, the best of Sellers. I didn't know he had any comedy albums. I can't, why was I never told? This is ridiculous that I don't know about this, but this is like very UK, this is like, you have to sort of know, I guess, British comedy. It's produced by George Martin, who then went on to produce for the Beatles. Anyway, to be listened to, but I didn't know that existed. Bob and Doug McKenzie, Great White North, good for them. I don't know how it stands up to the test of time, but this is a case where I don't care. Like, this is part of my youth. Yeah, Geddy Lee from Rush is on this as well, right? It's so Canadian.
Yeah, and that's why it's so nice to see it on this list. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So Lenny Bruce is on this list, as I believe he should be. And I think this is the right album, too. This is called the Carnegie Hall Concert in 1961. I can't fully appreciate Lenny Bruce as much as I've tried for two reasons. Number one, a lot of the references, I'm just sort of lost when he's making them, but also he does do a lot of, I guess, ranting. It's not, I'm not going to say rant. He does a lot of sort of exploratory stream of consciousness kind of stuff where he just starts talking and then expects that the funny will come. And I think, my ADD brain here is like, come on, man, we're just so it's not tight, it's very kind of all over the place. But the good thing about this album is this is before his entire life was consumed with, breaking the law and the consequences of breaking the law. Right? This guy was arrested. This is when people go, you can't say anything anymore in comedy. You should remember that this guy actually was arrested and thrown in jail multiple times. He was not allowed to perform in the country of England, banned for life from England. But this is early. So this is like early observations and stories of Lenny Bruce, and you can sort of see the genius before he starts talking about civil rights, and it gets a little angrier. And
he's an interesting guy, Lenny Bruce, and I kind of I've watched a couple things of his. I agree with you exactly. That's my summary of him too. I think he's an intellectual. I think he's a very smart person, and I think he has a lot of these ideas, and I think a lot of it was about challenging these norms. When you hear about someone challenging norms and being controversial, you think of like Andrew Dice Clay, Sam Kinison, and these names may or may not appear later on our discussion. And you think Lenny Bruce is going to be like that, but he's not. He's much more, as you said, subdued, not monotone. It
is jazz, man. And it is just like, let's just jam here and see what comes out of it. It's very funny you called him an intellectual. We were like on the road in Alberta, and can't remember what's it. We were in this hotel, and I was traveling with this comedian. So it was just he and I. And I remember he would introduce, we did 3 shows in that hotel bar. And he was like, I'm going to bring up your headliner now. And what I really like about your headliner is, like myself, he's an intellectual. And I was always like, you idiot. I don't think that's true, first of all. Number 2, I don't think that's true about you either. I've been in the car with you for many hours. Number 3, do you really think this group of drunkards in the basement of a hotel right now care? Is that the best way to bring me? It's like the least funny thing you can say. And he would say it every night. And he even mentioned it. I'm like, you don't have to say I'm an intellectual. He's like, oh, no, you should be proud of that. Yeah, you idiot. So you just called Lenny Bruce an intellectual, which I feel like is it's the opposite of a sales pitch to people when they're looking for comedy.
It's probably an insult to him and me, but okay.
Yeah, both. Next up, Joan Rivers absolutely belongs here. And what becomes a semi-legend most is 1983. So this is the point where she was the go-to guest host whenever Carson was off, which was fairly often. He was in semi-retirement sometimes in the 80s. He was chilling out quite a bit. So she was on the path to becoming a household name, and she's very sharp, and she could finally be vulgar and profane, which is interesting because she came out of an era, the 60s, 70s. She was one of the very few females doing stand-up. And she also had to go through things where at one point when she was pregnant with her daughter, they had to do a tight shot of her. and try to ignore the fact that she was pregnant. And the rule was, don't mention that you're pregnant. That was too intimate. It was too much of a female intimate thing to be mentioned in polite company on television. I mean, that's her roots, where she had to self-censor herself so much, and then she became this character. And so this is really her, and this is early. This is before her career really became that, red carpet mocking this person and that person. But yeah, I think this is exactly where it should be on this list, and it's good. It's early Joan Rivers. It's great.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think I've said it before. I think she was hilarious. I don't think she often gets the credit that she deserves for being such a trailblazer and being so funny. Like, she's legitimately hilarious. So, yeah, no, for sure. Agreed.
Next is Alan Sherman, My Son, the Nut. So I don't know if you know who Alan Sherman is.
I don't.
So he had my albums, My Son, the folk singer, My Son, the celebrity, My Son. So, you can picture some Jewish dad being like, get a load of this guy and what he's doing. It was very like steeped in sort of Jewish jokes, and it appealed to middle America, his stuff. And it was a lot of songs you might know. No, we're dating ourselves by saying this, but this, hello, mother, hello, father.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Here I am at Camp Granada. I think I know that from MASH, or I don't know, but that's come around over the years. But that was him, singing in this.
Oh, wow.
Kid riding home from camp. That's one of his songs. And this album did spend a few weeks on the Billboard charts, which no other comedy record had done until Weird Al came around in 2014. So it's goofy, it's silly, but I think it is a good part of comedy history, and I take no offense to it being on this list. And then Adam Sandler's on this list with They're All Gonna Laugh at You in 1993. So I really like early Adam Sandler. I saw him at Just for Laughs in the 90s. Okay. So I would have been just out of university or in university. And we went, a few friends, to this, late night Danger Zone comedy show of Just for Laughs. And Adam Sandler was on. And I always said, Adam Sandler, his comedy was just like, it's like when one of your friends is funny and you're all hanging together, you're in a basement, and just one of your friends is on that night. That's how accessible he felt. Like, oh, we can. Not true, though. I mean, this guy's talent, especially songwriting, comedic songwriting and singing and characters, he's much better than that. But he just had this gift of like appearing like one of us. And I think this year in particular, 1993, I think this would have been great. And Adam Sandler, not I think it would have been, it was great, Adam Sandler. And there's also some of the songs there. Thanksgiving song is on there. Yeah, I think this has earned its place in the top 40.
Yeah, I can remember this album coming out and everybody talking about it. Like, it really kind of proved the talent that Adam Sandler had, not just being on SNL. So, okay, let's go through the next 10. Number 30 is Child of the 50s, Robert Klein. Number 29, Denis Leary, No Cure for Cancer. Number 28, Martin Mull and His Fabulous Furniture, In Your Living Room. Number 27, Dave Attell, Skanks for the Memories. Number 26, Dick Gregory's In Living, Black and White. 25, Andrew Dice Clay, The Day the Laughter Died. Number 24, Los Cochinos, Cheech and Chong. Number 23, Lewis Black, The White Album. Number 22, another Monty Python record, Monty Python. And number 21, Hello, Dummy, Don Rickles.
Actually, a lot to dive into here in this group of 10. Robert Klein, Child of the 50s. So I remember, I think I was doing comedy about 2 or 3 years. I thought I had all these original ideas. Like, oh my God, I might be one of comedy's most prolific comedians. I mean, look at these amazing ideas. And then I listened to George Carlin and I listened to Robert Klein. My friend Faisal had recorded a CD with a bunch of albums burned up. And you just feel like, because Doug Muncie, one of the bartenders at the Comedy Nest, who'd been a bartender for years, career bartender, I asked him if he'd ever heard a joke, and he said to me, everything's been done, pal. Everything's been done. I was like, but has anyone ever? He goes, everything's been done. Let me just stop you right there. And I was like, he's just dismissing me. He doesn't want to hear my joke or something. And then I listened to Robert Klein and Carlin, but also very much Klein. And it's like, God damn it, everything has been done. Every idea you thought, like, oh, wouldn't that be fun? I mean, he's just, He's truly prolific. He's also very funny. He's incredibly listenable. I would recommend Robert Klein because he's not mentioned in, among the greats. He's not
Exactly.
mentioned.
He's underlooked. So is Martin Mull, who we'll talk about in a second. But these two are very underlooked. Yeah, yeah.
Very underlooked, underappreciated with most fans of comedy. But he was the first, if not one of the first comedians to start on the HBO circuit when HBO came out in the 80s. In the 70s, he was on, hosted SNL. I mean, he was really a big deal. And people see him, they know him more as like, somebody's dad or grandfather in Hollywood films, but he was a absolute force. And he's very, very smart and equal parts smart and silly. And yeah, I recommend you listen to Robert Klein. You'll be shocked at how much stuff he was saying that, has since been repurposed. But no, an OG. And the next up is a choice that I vehemently disagree with. Denis Leary, No Cure for Cancer. I can't. Man, I can't. I don't know where the funny is with Denis Leary.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just not my guy. This is just not my guy. It's too angry and it's too like, I saw a guy the other day with his hat on backwards. Put your hat forward. The front of the hat's supposed to keep the sun out. This stupid kid with his hat back, like that kind of stuff. Like, dude, what are you? This is this ridiculous outrage that I just couldn't get behind. Didn't agree with anything he says, didn't like or find anything funny. That guy, in my opinion, does not belong in the top.
I think maybe it's a product of his time, and I think we're going to get to some more that were definitely products of their time. But okay, fair enough. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Okay, so Martin Mull, 1973. We know Martin Mull from television. He's done plenty on television. Many people not know about this part of his career where he was a stand-up comic as well. But this is like, he is not just a stand-up comedian, he's also a singer. It's like they describe it as country rock on this album. There's also, songs, funny songs that he writes. So you knew this album, did you?
I did not. No, I did not.
But you knew Martin Mull as a stand-up.
Yeah, because I know Martin Mull and Robert Klein in this vein that they're very underlooked today. When people look back, I think true comedians like yourself know them. I think the average comedy fan maybe just glosses over them and forgets how influential they were and how funny they were, right?
Yeah. He broke into show business as a songwriter, by the way. He's written some songs that have, gone to Billboard, and then he was like a funny dude too. So this was like his singing and his funniness together, 1973, and then after the mid-70s, he was much more on television, and he was on Golden Girls. I don't know, lots of commercials, did tons of that. He would be on Hollywood Squares, and of course, I remember him most fondly and most recently on Arrested Development as Gene Parmesan, private investigator. So ridiculous, Gene Parmesan, so funny. Next up, Dave Attell. Listen. Skanks for the Memories is the name of the album. You get an idea of what type of comedy this is going to be. If you're into it, this is the master. This is another guy, like even people at the height of their careers will still reference this guy, and he's still performing, but they talk about him as though he's a legend, and that's because he is. I mean, the tightness of jokes, no wasted words, and he's a master of filthy jokes. Let's just say that. And if you're into that kind of stuff, this is an album to listen to. And this was another one on that CD that Faisal burned for me. I really, really enjoy. I was like, how could I get more of this guy? This is incredible joke writing. And it's not always easy. With the filth, you get kind of, loose with your comedy. It's not typically not as tight. But this is like, you're laughing despite yourself half the time. He makes you laugh. So Dave Attell is a master, and that album belongs there. Dick Gregory, I have a lot to say about Dick Gregory. A section of my comedy class was about Dick Gregory. This is called In Living Black and White, 1961, recorded at the Playboy Club in Chicago. That is an interesting note about this album because Dick Gregory was the first Black man to perform in a white nightclub, and it was at the Playboy Club. A lot of people do not know about or appreciate Hugh Hefner, owner of Playboy, was quite a civil rights proponent, maybe not an activist, but he was a proponent, so he was fully on board. The first time Dick Gregory performed at the Playboy Club, it was like this comedy of errors almost. It's like this very bad snowstorm in Chicago. The headliner calls in sick, not because of the snowstorm. Apparently he called in sick. Dick Gregory gets the call. The headliner recommends Dick Gregory. It's a black guy. Hugh Hefner's like, cool. Snowstorm hits. They're like, I don't know. Dick Gregory leaves his house, south side of Chicago, public transit in 1960, all right? In a snowstorm. It takes him 2.5 hours to get to this club. They're calling him at home to say, maybe don't come. It's actually a group of Southern, I don't know what it was, like serial execs or something. And it was a noticeably racist audience, down south, white men who were very wealthy in 1960, you can imagine. So a very, a racist group of people. He comes in, he gets on stage, and he had this gift of knowing how to talk to white people at the time, which you needed to have if you were going to perform for white people, because white people in the early 1960s, 1950s, when he was performing prior to that, white people did not want to be literally, metaphorically, or literally be talked down to by a black person. You have a black man on stage higher than you, and then you're being told what to think. That did not fly in general. And so he had this knack of knowing how to talk to white people. It's this idea of, you make a little fun of yourself, you're making fun of us together, and then you can. So he killed it, and he was invited back for 2 weeks for a 2-week run at the Playboy Club because of that comedy of errors, as I say, that night. And yeah, then the Playboy Club, pretty big deal. I don't know if they had locations in Japan, in Montreal, Jamaica, it was all over the world. You paid a $25 membership, and they probably had like 1 million members across the world, $25 million coming into play. I mean, it was very, very profitable, and people wanted to have that Playboy bunny, the little key, and so I think it was a big deal. It meant a lot for him to record this album at the Playboy Club. That's a place that has a special place in his heart. And Dick Gregory also, how people die and then you say, he gone too soon. Dick Gregory did not die, but he was gone too soon from comedy. He became much more of an activist, and civil rights became his jam over comedy. But don't sleep on Dick Gregory. If you don't know him, if you don't appreciate what this man has done, absolutely phenomenal, really, really phenomenal, and a trailblazer for so many comedians to come after him. As I said, the first black comedian to perform in a white club. Yeah, so his album 100% belongs exactly where it is, if not higher, I would say. Next up is Dice Clay, The Day the Laughter Died. I don't remember even loving it the way some of my friends did at the time. He was doing a character, and I was okay with that. And then a friend of mine booked him to perform with his son in Montreal. And the stories they told us about who he was, even backstage, very, very high maintenance, very being a jerk just to be a jerk. And this was way past his prime. So I have these mixed feelings about Andrew Dice Clay. This album, do you know it was produced by Rick Rubin?
Oh, wow. No, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. So, and I think it's deliberately provocative, and provocative in the sense that in this album, I remember it's a small club. Some woman laughs, and then he makes fun of her for laughing. These people were not prepared. They were not Andrew Dice Clay fans. They were unprepared audience members, and there was a lot of squirming. And that's what this was. You make a choice to do all of that stuff and then put out the album. So as I say, very deliberate, provocative thing that he did here. Not for me, but I understand why it's in the top 40.
And I think you're seeing a trend for some of these. So Dice Clay, Denis Leary, Lenny Bruce, though Ali may take exception for me lumping these people together. I think sometimes you have to push the comedy art form forward And sometimes it's not even that funny, but these are the steps that need to be taken to get to the next level, to get to Chris Rock, to get to these other stages. So that's my theory, but we'll see if it pans out with some of these other.
No, you're absolutely
coaches.
right. I think it's called the best comedy albums of all time. So, it depends on your metrics. Are you talking about influential?
Yeah,
Are
influential.
you talking about made
exactly.
you laugh? Or
Yeah.
right, exactly. Speaking of influential, Cheech and Chong, Los Cochinos. I think a lot of people, younger folks, would be like, what's the dad from whatever movie, or what's that older judge from my favorite legal show doing in this Cheech and Chong duo?
Yeah, exactly.
He's done so much since Cheech Marin. But yeah, they had an album called Big Bamboo in 1972. And then this one is right after that. 73 was Los Cochinos. And they were a big deal, man. They were like, in the time of free love and the hippie movement and all that, these were two potheads really reveling in their potheadedness and being, it's only been legal a few years, this is back in 1972. These guys were like fully, like the van door opens and all the smoke from their van comes out in their films and all this kind of stuff. Just to give you an idea, George Harrison from the Beatles, Carole King, they were both on this album. They enlisted the help of both George Harrison, Carole King, a few other people to play on a song. And so this is a bunch of funny songs and then stoner jokes. And in case you're dismissing that, got a Grammy for Best Comedy Recording in
so interesting.
Yeah.
Again, I think this is, this idea of the drug subculture, the pot subculture. I think you needed to have this. I don't particularly find Cheech and Chong that funny, but I can see the importance of it. How about that?
This goes right into what you said about sometimes you have to push the art form forward. I think this really satisfies all of that I also enjoyed watching. I think the movies were funny. The albums were not as funny to me, but it was like really a comment on the times. And I think you had to, I'm sure there's a Latino comedians, if you talk to George Lopez, to be like represented however, however a weird way it was. Like you and I talk about Apu being representation for brown people when he first came out. I mean, this was representation. This was something. You're moving the art form forward, and you're also putting Hispanic folks, Latinos, Chicanos on the map and making them part of like not just subculture. Yes, there was a drug subculture, but these guys were really, the top of the heap in terms of American entertainment. So good for them. Lewis Black, the White Album. I know you know this album. And it's right before full angry Lewis, right? He hasn't found the fury just quite yet on this album. And because it's released in 2000, he does talk about Y2K and, Bill Clinton and stuff. It's very tied to the time, but I did enjoy it. I did like it. He was right after this is when Lewis Black came in onto The Daily Show, right? So this was a great moment in his career, and I like Lewis Black. I gotta wonder about top 40 albums of all time, but sure, why not?
Yeah, and again, it just may be a product of its time, right? Yeah, I think Lewis Black is a bit of diminishing returns over time, but again, we're not talking about that. We're talking about this album coming out in the early 2000s. So, okay.
Next up, or did you talk about Monty Python?
No, I did. Yeah, the next two are, you have to talk about
have been mentioned. Okay. The next two. So you mentioned Monty Python and you mentioned Don Rickles. Yes, you did. You did. Monty Python, yeah, I think it should be there. This one's called Another Monty Python Record. It seems like a dismissive title, like, just another, we'll just throw it. But they were actually unhappy with their first comedy album. So this one was like, let's do this for real and let's do this properly. And yeah, I think, this is Spanish Inquisition. Nobody is prepared for the Spanish Inquisition. Spam is on this. There's, it's like this.
Pretty classic. And people think, oh, yeah, but these are albums. Aren't they more TV? Aren't they more? But so really, they have these radio skits that are completely understandable without having to have any visuals.
Sure. And it's also 1971. There's no Saturday Night Live just yet. There is no HBO just yet. So for anybody who was doing this edgier stuff that wasn't going to fly on like a Carson, There's no Letterman yet even. What avenues did you have? And we'll talk about this soon enough with a couple of other people, but comedy albums were the way to get your comedy, whatever form it was in, uncensored to the masses. You didn't have to take like network notes and stuff like that and change things around. So yeah, the comedy album is a big deal, is why we're talking about it today. Next up, Don Rickles, Hello Dummy. This is like the best of Rickles. I saw Don Rickles just like a year before he passed away at Just for Laughs. And sometimes I think I shouldn't have. I should have left it, this Don Rickles. Also, I mean, it does not age well. And, he tried to just be sort of a guy who's like, well, I just make fun of everybody. But in a time of like, hey, why don't we not punch down? Don Rickles didn't age super well, but his speed, like how quick this guy was on his feet, you would see it on Carson. I remember that. Like, I remember being baffled by how's all this coming to him on the spot, because it was almost too fast. But it was, he's a legend. He belongs in the top 40. This album will not have aged well. This is 1968. So, yes, approach it if you're going to listen to it with that in mind.
Okay, let's do the next 10. Number 20, the songs and comedy of the Smothers Brothers, recorded live at the Purple. 19, strategic grill locations, Mitch Hedberg. 18, National Lampoon, Lemmings. 17, Stephen Wright, I Have a Pony. 16, Bill Hicks, Rant in E minor. 15 is An Evening with Mike Nichols and Elaine May. 14 is Werewolves and Lollipops by Patton Oswalt. 13, Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks, The Complete 2,000-Year-Old Man. 12, Sam Kinison, Louder Than Hell. And 11 is Uncensored, Red Fox. Ollie, what do you think of these?
I mean, I have some things to say about a few of these, certainly. Smothers Brothers, okay, so this is at the Purple Onion, 1961. They were a variety show. They were on CBS. They were notorious for hating network notes, which is why I think it was the late 60s. They lasted 2 or 3 seasons tops because they were always, fighting. They were in a constant battle with network censors, and they were basically canceled eventually because they couldn't work with CBS. CBS couldn't work with them. But they would push artistic boundaries, which is why the networks pushed back. They were, engaged themselves in political protest. If you look up the Smothers Brothers, and I would love to hear from anybody if they've watched the special on these two, because I've seen little chunks of this and that, but they're great. They're amazing. They are very, very clever. And as brothers, they are really like so tight and polished. When I hear the Sklar brothers and hear like, those are 2 twins, but like when I hear how quick they are with each other, it always reminds me of the Smothers Brothers. And yeah, it's very fun to listen to duos like this.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing them in the 80s on TV. I forget if they had a variety show or something like that. And it was kind of corny. And you're like, okay, whatever. And you don't realize how funny they were. Really, really innovative. So for sure, deserves to be on this list.
Next one is Mitch Hedberg, Strategic Grill Locations, 1999. He died a few years after that. He's one of the best. That's all I can tell you. Everybody should know who Mitch Hedberg is and listen to this album if you do not. He was really, really something special. Died because of, drug addiction and this kind of stuff. But don't let that get in the way from listening to some of the tightest and most absurd and hilarious comedy that you'll ever hear. National Lampoon Lemmings, I know nothing about.
Okay, me neither. Move on.
Never even heard of it. Stephen Wright, I Have a Pony. I put Stephen Wright and Mitch Hedberg both in this, similar category. Just absolute greats. No fat whatsoever. Tightest joke writing. This guy was especially because of his, he's the OG, right? Mitch Hedberg would have been influenced by Stephen Wright, but just absolute mastery on display, master of one-liners with
the monotone delivery,
laconic pacing. Good. It's really good.
It's a classic.
Classic, Grammy nominated, charted on Billboard as well. And yeah, it's such a great album. He was nervous to put another album out after it just got too much love. So that was 1985. He didn't release another album till 2007, which was called I Still Have a Pony.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, which is exactly what Stephen Wright would name his album. Next is Bill Hicks' Rant in E minor. I couldn't get into Bill Hicks. I couldn't get into Bill Hicks. And, like Denis Leary, probably very influenced by Bill Hicks. The anger superseded the, and some of it was like, yes, we should be angry about that. You're right to be angry. But too much of his comedy left me feeling like, where's the comedy exactly? And that's not what I look for in my comedy. But a legend. I don't take offense to him being here on this list. I just couldn't get into this guy. Mike Nichols and Elaine May, An Evening with Mike Nichols and Elaine May, 1960. This is a duo worth looking into. People talk about, so I knew nothing about them other than, videos that I've seen, obviously. They were one of the defining comic duos of the 1960s. I've heard audio only. I've never actually seen anything of theirs. So to say I've seen them is probably wrong. But yeah, like really, these are OGs. They started working in 1957. They performed, in these small clubs. They started with Joan Rivers, Woody Allen, and the New York scene. Eventually, they were doing Broadway. They have multiple comedy albums, 4 Grammy Award nominations. They have won Best Comedy Album for this very album, An Evening with Mike Nichols and Elaine May. If you look up Elaine May, she especially continued to have a career as a screenwriter, director afterwards into the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, dude, I think you're shortchanging Mike Nichols, who is one of the greatest directors of all time.
That's
The Graduate.
I love the ladies.
Silkwood, Working Girl, Postcards from the Edge, Regarding Henry, The Birdcage, Primary Colors, Closer, Charlie Wilson's War. So you can't, and of course,
I've diminished his role.
Big stage director as well. So, Mike Nichols, one of the greats. So yeah, no, but I totally agree with you. What about the next one? Patton Oswalt.
Yeah, this is awesome. I don't think I appreciated how intelligent he was at the time, but very, very smart. This was alt comedy on display at the time. And I think maybe I was not fully into appreciating that scene. This is the year that he did Ratatouille, right? So he had already done a lot of, he was sort of getting to this status where many people in comedy knew him, certainly on that alt scene. This is 2007. And he does it in Austin, which kind of put Austin on the map as well. Like, oh, Austin has good comedy audiences, right? You don't think of Texas for an alt comic. And he's got, political comedy and pop culture. And this is equal parts smart and silly. And I'm a big fan of Patton Oswalt. I didn't give him his due when it first came out, but he deserves it, certainly. So then comes one of my favorite duos, probably my favorite of all time, the Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. I love these guys for what they did. It was so ridiculous. I love outside of this, how the friendship that they had, they would see each other every single day. They were like best friends, like just soulmates, basically. The whole thing is a beautiful story, but the 2,000-year-old man, it's Mel Brooks is deep in character, which is an absurd character to be deep in. And he's often cracking Carl Reiner up, which was an interesting part of their dynamic as well. Carl Reiner, like it was as if Carl was hearing it sometimes for the first time, which makes you wonder, was some of this improvised on the spot? But I delight in listening to the 2,000-year-old man. And, there's a comedy station that I listen to, Funny 820, it's called, it's an AM radio station. When the news gets too much, when other stuff gets too much, I put it on there, and I'm always so happy when they play clips of these two guys.
Okay, next, Sam Kinison.
Again, not for me. Like, I can deal with Lewis Black's rage. This man's rage was always too much. It was really like being on a roller coaster you didn't want to be on. That's how I felt like Kinison, because, he would talk at this very normal pace and he would get even very low. And you were feeling the tick, 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 tick of the roller coaster going up. And then you come down with this like thrashing around like an animal, basically screaming. I just didn't like the scream. It just didn't work for my ears. Literally, my ears could not take the screaming. Very controversial dude. Interesting life, right? Came out of a religious background. And he was a pastor or some such thing. I love the idea of Sam Kinison. I love his jokes on paper. I can't listen to Sam Kinison for very long periods of time at all.
Totally agree. Next is Uncensored Red Fox.
Yeah. Red Fox Uncensored. There's something that I wanted to give this man his flowers as well. Red Fox had released almost 50 comedy albums in his time. They were called party albums. And they were always dirty, so they didn't get any, plus he was a black man in the 50s, 60s, who was, doing stuff for black audiences. He didn't crack open the way Dick Gregory did that early. Eventually, of course, he did. But he has, Richard Pryor called Red Fox an influence, Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock, these guys. Chris Rock actually on Everybody Hates Chris, you can hear Chris's parents listening to Red Fox albums. And then Chris starts doing that stand-up, retelling Red Fox jokes at school. I don't know if you remember that episode. And he gets in huge trouble for that, which is like a reality of like many black families at the time. Put the kids to bed so we can listen to these party albums, Jamie Foxx chose his last name, it was not his real last name, to be Fox as a tribute to Red Fox. He was a mentor to Richard Pryor. He was a mentor to Pat Morita as well. You remember Pat Morita, who we could do a whole episode on as well, Japanese Canadian fame. A lot of people don't know that he was a comedy before he was waxing on and waxing off. Yeah, so this guy lived quite a life. Personal life was a bit in shambles with his 4 marriages, divorces, this kind of stuff. But yeah, he was really something, and he absolutely deserves to be recognized. People don't talk about him quickly enough when they talk about comedians. When you start talking about black comedians, then maybe he's mentioned, but this is one of the OGs in a big way. And he also, really, that show that he had on television, Sanford and Son, that was a big deal. That sort of, redefined sitcoms and certainly black sitcoms as well.
No, for sure. Totally agree. Let's get into the top 10. You can tell me your thoughts on these, so I'll list them. Number 10, Comedy -1, Albert Brooks. Number 9, Bigger and Blacker, Chris Rock. Number 8, Steve Martin, Let's Get Small. Number 7, Rodney Dangerfield, No Respect. Number 6, David Cross, Shut Up You Effin' Baby. I'll censor that one. Number 5, Eddie Murphy Comedian. Number 4, A Night at the Met, Robin Williams. Number 3, The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart. Number 2, Class Clown, George Carlin. And number 1, Richard Pryor, Live on the Sunset Strip. What do you think of these, Ollie?
Right. So we start with Albert Brooks. People who know this guy may not know his comedy background. His real name is, do you know his real name?
No.
Albert Einstein.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, you got to change that. You got to change that if you're going to be in comedy. But very, very prolific. People talk about him leaving comedy way too early. And, his style was also, narcissist, egotistical. It was, it wasn't for everybody, but it was very, very much intelligent. I think he should be on the top 40 list for sure. I don't know if it should be number 10, but he was a very significant contributor to show business in general. If you look up the things he's done, the awards he's won, it's pretty incredible what he's done. His brother is Super Dave Osborne, dude.
All right.
Bob Einstein, also known as Marty Funkhauser.
Yes.
If you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, or Larry Middleman on Arrested Development. Anyway, so this family, the contributions that they've made, Bob, just those roles, but look up Albert Einstein, look up Albert Brooks and see what this man has done, especially as a director and a writer and a screenwriter and this kind of stuff. But yeah, sure, he should be on this list. I don't know if that's where he should be, but good for him. Comedy -1, 1973. Next album, you said Chris Rock, Bigger and Blacker. I mean, I think both you and I would be like, this should be here. Mm-hmm. And it should be in the top 10.
Yeah, maybe it should be higher. I mean, one of the best comedy albums of all time. I mean, what else can you say, right?
Yeah, jokes that stayed with you for decades afterwards. You see something and you go, that reminds me of when Chris Rock talked about it. Absolutely. Steve Martin, Let's Get Small. So this is 1977. Many people do not know he is the original arena comedian. Some people be like, oh, Dane Cook started that, or they only know from the last decade of comics doing arenas. In the 1970s, Steve Martin was selling out arenas, and he walked away from it all. He was doing it as a stand-up comic. He was done. If you read his book, Born Standing Up, You get all the background on what he was doing, how he got to where he was, why he left it. I'll leave that for the book, but he deserves to be in the top 10, in my opinion. A massive, massive force, and so absurd, but his commitment to his bits, just fantastic. Rodney Dangerfield, No Respect, 1980. This is the height of Rodney Dangerfield. I don't know if I could do a full Rodney Dangerfield album. I could do 15 minutes and love every second of 15 minutes. Once you get to the 35, 45, I don't know if I can. I've never tried. But, it's, again, he's a one-liner, perfect joke construction, and very, very unique delivery. I mean, maybe not unique if it was the 1950s, but very unique to Rodney. It was, no one could do what he was doing. So I think he should be on the top 40 for sure. Next up, you said David Cross. Shut up, you effing baby. That's very interesting. You introduced me to the show, Mr. Show. I did not know about it until you told me about it. And between Mr. Show and Arrested Development, there was a period where David Cross, originally a stand-up, returned to stand-up. And this is a huge album. This is a double CD. So it is really David Cross at his sort of most comfortable, doing a lot of riffing. It's not tight joke construction at all. Some of it is pretty dark, and I think it's worth a listen. I know a lot of stuff from this album. I don't think it should be at number 6.
Yeah, I think it's a bit high. I think it's because it's a very influential album to comics, I think. Like, a lot of comedians love this album, and a lot of my friends who are really into comedy love this album. So I think that's probably the reason, but yeah, maybe it can be argued about how high it should be on this list. Yeah.
Eddie Murphy, comedian. This is 1983. This is before Beverly Hills Cop and all this. He was like young, cocky, very funny, owned the stage. This should be in the top 10. Did not age well.
No.
There's some, he's talked about it himself as well. The homophobic undertones and overtones are there. And yeah, it's a little tougher to listen to now. And it's also tough to be like, not tough just to listen to him, but tough to be like, I laughed my ass through this entire album and never thought twice about how somebody who's gay would feel about it. Like, what does that say about me? Anyway, that's a societal thing. And, there's a bit of an embarrassment that comes as you listen and you feel like, man, this wasn't cool. I'm not sure why we thought it was. But anyway.
When you think about how big all of Eddie Murphy stuff in the 80s, Comedian, Eddie Murphy Raw, Eddie Murphy Delirious, these were so huge. Everybody I knew talked about these. Like, we listened to these all the time. It was crazy. And again, it's similar. You think about like the Next Decade, Chris Rock. Like, these are just things that people were into all the time. And then maybe to a lesser extent, Sandler later on. But he was so big, man. People don't understand. And I agree with you. It has not aged well. I don't even know if I could listen to it now. But yeah, I think it does deserve to be on here.
Number 4 is Robin Williams' A Night at the Met, which is my personal top 5 albums of all time as well. So this is exactly where I would want it to be. I don't know how much coke he was doing, but it is like, the speed with which his mind is working and his mouth is working is really something to behold. Even if the cocaine's doing the heavy lifting, I still stand by the fact that there was a human being behind it coming up with all of that stuff. It's really just shy of almost too much. It's crazy. It's an assault. It's a comedy assault. And it's, this is, if you're talking about comedy albums that made you laugh and that were like just wildly funny, I think this is exactly where it should be at number 4.
100% agree.
Number 3 is Bob Newhart, The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart. Now, here's the thing that needs to be appreciated about Bob Newhart. This man had never performed in a comedy club. He was like the funny guy at an accounting office or something, and somebody, recommended him. So they hear, I guess he recorded some stuff in a cafe and they sent it and they said, okay, this is great. We'd love to record this. So we're going to set you up in a comedy club and you can record like 4 or 5 shows and then we'll compile the album from the jokes. And Bob Newhart was like, well, that's going to be a problem because I've never performed in a comedy club before. And, this is referred to as the granddaddy of comedy albums. He released this album and it got him a Grammy for Best New Artist, which, by the way, not Best New Comedy Artist.
Yeah.
He won the Grammy for Best New Art against other musicians. And then at one point, he was competing with The Return of the Button Down Man, his next album. He was, again, I can't even fully appreciate how large he was because I didn't live through that time. But just reading about it and hearing all these interviews, it's pretty insane. And it's super clean. It's super sharp. It's a really razor sharp. The
super
timing,
sharp. He is so
something to be beholden. Yeah,
and I say intelligent in a way that he knows how to construct a joke, so what's coming up next, but he subverts it slightly. It's just, I don't know, man. He's just a genius.
He's a genius. It is slow moving. It's 1960. Your attention span has to come into check a little bit so that you can enjoy the pacing. But it's a great album, and it deserves all the accolades it got. Anybody who knows about comedy, if you're a student of comedy, you know what number 1 and number 2 are, right? You got to have these two here. George Carlin, Class Clown, this 1972 album is, one of the most, if not the most influential comedy album to comedians who are, living and working since the 80s. This was the 7 words you can't say on television time. This was before SNL, before HBO, the launching pads for George Carlin. And this is right after he came back. He was doing this really clean cut character. It's crazy to see him in a suit and tie, on Sullivan, just being very, very sort of generically funny. And then they say reinvented himself, but it's actually, he just became himself. And it started with the hippy dippy weatherman, which was a character. And then he was like, no, I am a hippie. I don't agree with anything that the establishment is doing. And he came back as this guy, long hair, beard, the denim, the t-shirts, all of this kind of stuff was very opposite to what he used to look like. But he had found his voice. He found exactly who he is. Class Clown, one of the greatest albums of all time. Not a real debatable subject right there.
And then number 1.
And number 1 has to be and should be for a long time, Live on the Sunset Strip. Yeah, this is the best. It's 1982. Richard Pryor, you're hard-pressed to find anybody who doesn't talk about him as being the best. If they do not, they will say it's Carlin, who's at number 2. But Richard Pryor's in everybody's top 3. And this album is the reason why you can listen to anything Richard Pryor from that era and you'll be entertained, but it was also something very raw and real. So you were, it's 1982, you're coming out of characters, right? Whether it was Bob Newhart in the 60s, but also a lot of the other comedians were doing characters. It's grounded in that Borscht Belt time of the 1950s. The real you doesn't come out, right? You do a character of a version of you. But this was the most real guy. And, Carlin also, you got to the heart of who he was, but this was talking honestly about his really kind of unfortunate life circumstances and mining all that reality for comedy gold. Its influence cannot be overstated. Such a great album.
Well, that's the list there, guys. Let us know what you guys thought. I'm going to challenge Ali, maybe for a future episode, we can talk about his 10 favorite albums that did not make the list. How about that?
I like it.
Yeah,
and
okay.
I could come up with that really easily.
So that's our episode for today. Let us know what you guys thought. Like we said, a bit of a different episode where we just covered a comedy topic due to the interest of time. Let us know what you guys thought about this list. Have you heard any of those albums? What did you think? Did you agree with Ali's takes? And my takes, but Ali, of course, the expert on this topic today. And let us know, did we miss any? And like I suggested, maybe we'll do a follow-up episode where Ali gives his top 10 overlooked albums. Reach out to us, drvcomedian@gmail.com, drvcomedian on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We are everywhere. Ali, what do you got coming up in the next couple of months?
Standupalley.com
Yes.
is where you got to go. And in fact, you know what? I should probably go there and update some things myself. That's not
You
a bad
better
idea.
get on that.
Get
Also,
on
if you
that.
could update your reviews, actually don't update them, but if you haven't given us a review, 5-star reviews are always appreciated. And the comments too, we really like those because sometimes even those comments help us shape our show. So please do that. And one more thing, just remember that although I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. Medical issues we talk about, which we didn't today, are for your interest and information only, and they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.